Today we're going to go over Where I Lived and What I Lived For by Henry David Thoreau, which I found out first period. I guess down my search did this thing, you can figure out who famous you're related to, and like half of them were related to him. So I was like, why didn't you read your uncle's stuff or whatever? But I didn't think that's very funny. And then we're going to work on our second argument prompt, okay? So you should have that on your Chromebook, the Where I Lived and What I Lived For annotations. And there were group questions at the end that we're going to answer together today. So, how many of you had a chance to read that? All right, 3. So no new year thing for the rest of you. Excellent. Okay, well, we'll answer the first one just together, and then I will have you like in pairs. We'll go over kind of 2, and then talk, and then 3, and then talk. So that will give the rest of you a chance to quickly glance over all of that and have something to say. So, in the opening paragraph, and let me back up. So, Henry David Thoreau, and I think maybe I said this last time, but who remembers what happened last year? Like, no one. So, Henry David Thoreau, I think we would have thought he was a weirdo today, because he was kind of a recluse. He really liked to be by himself. He loved just like being out in nature, which doesn't sound that weird, except for like, he was like obsessive about his journals, and he would go around and be like, I saw this flower today. Last year it bloomed at this time, but now it's blooming here. Or like, ooh, I think that these flowers might bloom. I remember they were over here, so I'm gonna go to that patch and see what I can find. So he was like, I almost wonder if maybe he was like on the autism spectrum, because he was like so detail oriented about these plants, right? However, like his reclusivity allowed him to think a lot of really interesting and powerful ideas, because he wasn't kind of influenced by other people, and he was constantly kind of trying to get to the deeper meaning of life, right? So the Where I Lived and What I Lived For is from his book called Walden, and Walden was a collection of like essays that he wrote while he stayed by Walden Pond, and he did that for 2 years. He built like a little cabin by himself. It was very cheap, and he was very proud of how cheaply he could build this and live off the land. And he would have visitors and stuff, right? But like, he did not live in society. And then he just really tried to be like, okay, what is the meaning of life? Can I figure out truth through just like being as immersed in nature as I possibly can? And so that's where this piece comes from. I think it was one of the first ones, although I don't know for sure, but I know it's a new book, the Walden book that I gave to you. And then there's a bunch of other excerpts in that we'll read from starting for homework next time. So, looking at this piece then that he wrote while he was alone in the woods, he tries to answer basically a universal question. What is that universal question? What's he trying to uncover about life? Hi. And there's only 3 of you who have read, so don't be shy. It's right in that first line, so read that first line. What does it say?
He wants to see like what only the essentials are.
Okay, the essentials of what?
What the life.
Right, so he is trying to figure out what is the meaning of life, right? And I love that first line. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, right? And I think about my own life. I'm like, do I live deliberately? Probably not, because like my alarm wakes me up. I'm angry with it. It doesn't feel very deliberate. I mean, I did set the alarm, so maybe that was deliberate. But a lot of the things that I do in my day-to-day life, I'm like, am I living deliberately? Probably no. I'm like on autopilot, like 75% of the time, right? And maybe that rings true with you too. But I love that he's going out, he's like, I went out here because I wanted to make sure that I'm living purposefully, and that I'm doing things because I choose to, not because society wishes me to conform in a certain way. I also love a little bit later in that paragraph, he says, I wanted to live deep and suck out the marrow of life. Are we living deeply? Are we trying to get to like that gooey crap in the middle of structure, right? That's where like marrow is, right? The building blocks of what life is. And so he's really questioning, like, what is life? What is essentially the truth of existence, right? And that's why he's gone out to this little pond to hopefully discover more truth than what he feels like he's getting in a more industrialized and society and within his community. Okay, so in the second paragraph, after he's kind of laid out, here's why I went to go live by myself in the woods. He starts talking kind of in metaphors, right, or similes, but he kind of expands these symbols. So the first one he talks about are ants, okay? So what I want you to do is turn to someone next to you and answer to A, B, and C. So you're going to look at, in paragraph 2, this is towards the beginning, how do ants live in C? What observations have you made about ants? How are they mean? How are civilized people like ants? How is a nation like ants? So what is he talking about with ants here? Which sounds weird, but I think it's some cool stuff. So talk to someone next to you for a few minutes about ants. Go.
Not even know why I did everything.
So read it out. Yeah, you didn't skim over it. Who did read it? Okay, so you can talk to Maddie and Ryan if you want, Joseph, because they are not subject to like.
No, you're not. You're probably so not good.
Well,
I guess,
people are living straight around.
goes with all the questions. Our task, we live for the phrase like every man for himself. You live for yourself.
That's what I kind
Our
of
nature is very organized, routinely, that's it. So they're neat. Yeah, I see everything else. Yeah.
How are ants?
How civilized people for
I think they need it means like flow.
work for themselves and provide for themselves and their family. Kind of interesting, some people
Yeah.
are gonna play like
They're really small.
Yeah.
They are low enough.
You could have covered that. Yeah. That's a real problem. And then it's information.
You kind of say about how civilized people are like ants.
And then once you've discussed it, just jot down some things to that question. Sydney's not here today. Okay, so for those of you who didn't read, I'm gonna lob the easy question at you. What are ants like? If you haven't read, you should just jump on this. You've seen ants before. Yes.
I said that they all just kind of work together for a common goal, you know, to get food or whatever, and they don't have very much variation in their lives, and they're kind of insignificant.
Okay, I like that. What else do we know about ants? Yeah.
They can be like greedy and selfish at sometimes, if you think about it, like they always steal from what the colonies maybe, they're always trying to put other people down, so they can steal from them.
Okay. Yeah, they're constantly building like their own colony, and that's like what matters most, right? Like their own survival, their own colony. They attack other bugs, which, you know, I guess if I were an ant, I wouldn't want to get eaten by other bugs either. But yeah, very self-focused. What else? There's like that, what is it, a fable, I guess, about the ants and the grasshoppers. What do we think about ants in the context of that fable or that story? You guys know that? Oh man, we're getting, yeah.
Isn't it that they're more prepared because the grasshopper isn't like prepared for the winter?
Yeah. Yeah, so like there's the ant and the grasshopper, and the ants are like, oh no, winter's coming, grasshopper, you better shape up and store some food like us, because we're so productive. And the grasshopper's like, yeah, whatever, I'm fine. I'll worry about it when it gets there. So the ants work like all summer long, they're preparing for the winter, and the grasshopper's just like doing its thing, right? Whatever it wants, bouncing around, I don't know, whatever grasshoppers do. And winter comes and the ants have enough food and the grasshopper starves and dies because it didn't plan ahead, right? So we think about ants, we're like, oh, they're so productive, they're so really thoughtful and like, not really like thoughtful, I guess thoughtful's like a terrible word for it, but like, you know, they're like thinking about survival and they're doing the tasks to make sure that they survive, right? However, with these like thoughts about ants, the fact that they're like all working together, someone in my other class mentioned like they all walk in a straight line, right? You've seen like little ants to something to get food, something you drop and then back. Thinking about ants and what Thoreau says, what point is he making with these ants? About civilization, about the nation. Let's ask Graham. What point is he making about ants?
They don't really think for themselves, they just do everyone else, or all the other ants are doing.
Yeah, there's definitely like this conformity type thing. They're all just doing what their other ant friends are doing. Okay. What other points is he making about ants and civilization? Yeah, Lily.
I guess they put like, oh, I totally forgot the word.
That's okay.
They put routine above everything else, and
Okay.
orderly routine is most important.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. What else? Does he think that being like ants is a good thing? No, okay, Nathan, tell me more about this.
Well, he talks about how our life is frittered away by detail.
Oh, I like that. That's a good one.
Don't really have a meaningful life, I guess.
Yeah, right, so he's like, okay, there's all these things we gotta do. There's like this old country song that talks about how like we're in a hurry to get things done and we rush, but really all we have to do in life is live and die, right? Like those are like the only, I mean, like hopefully that doesn't happen too soon because you made good choices, right? But like, but the same thing with the ants, like, okay, they're like constantly productive, right? And they're like, gotta do this, gotta do that, this routine, I follow the people in front of me, right? But like, what is the end to that? Like, why are you doing that? And thinking about like humanity, right? We're higher order thinking species most of the time, right? Sometimes I think, but like when we're doing these things, these routines that we have for ourselves, what is the point? Are we just following in the line of like what everyone else is doing? Or are we trying to suck out the marrow of life, right? And so I think, you know, he's kind of appalled by society and the conformity that it places emphasis upon, right? We saw it in his essay, I think it was Civil Disobedience, where he says that like following laws for no purpose is not what should be like the end all be all, and that we should really think about what we're doing. And so he's looking at like this idea that like, why are we doing what we're doing? What is the point of it? Are we just ants? Or are we men? Right, he doesn't say that, but thinking about that. Okay, any other thoughts you guys want to add about ants? Well, don't worry, because tonight you're going to read some more about what he thinks about ants, so look forward to that. Okay, let's talk about railroads. So do the same thing. This is at like the second half of the paragraph. He writes very long paragraphs, cause I don't know. So if you look on like the second page, it's about, halfway through and he's talking about railroads, okay? So there's 3 questions in the group questions about railroads. He asks, what they symbolize, what does the railroad do to us? What does it prevent us from doing? And then think of an example of a railroad in our society and how does it support those arguments. So if you're done, you can talk through it with someone to get that. If you're not, quickly skim through that second half of the paragraph and then start answering those questions, and I'll give you a few minutes, okay? Break. Railroads. Okay, let's talk about the railroad. So, what does the railroad symbolize? Doing. Tell me about what he thinks about the railroad. Let's ask Lauren. What do you think the railroad symbolizes in this?
I think it can symbolize like pride or laziness in society because they just wanna like use the railroad but not contribute to it.
Okay, I think for some people, like where he gets to the end, he's talking about some people get to ride it, and some people are ridden on upon it, maybe. But maybe more than pride, just like a stratification between like the haves and haves not, right? Where, like, yes, it does benefit some people to ride this railroad, but at what cost? Well, at the cost of the lives of immigrants. I don't know how much you know about like the building of the railroad. I don't know a ton myself, but it was largely built by immigrants, and they were terrible conditions and very dangerous, and a lot of people died to build this, so that like people who had money, right, could ride these railroads. What else do you think it could symbolize? Yeah, Rahi.
I think it kind of symbolizes like the mark of a higher classman. Like it says, in every few years, a new lot is laid down and run over so that if some have the pleasure of riding on the rail, others have the misfortune to be ridden upon. So it kind of just says if you're fortunate enough, that means you're rich, you have time, like you don't have to be working as much.
Okay.
Whereas if you don't, then you're not as fortunate.
Yeah, and that's definitely a point that he makes. He makes a point before that though, right? About the railroad. He's talking about just in general before it gets to that part about technological advances, and then he gets to this point that he's making about railroads. Yeah. Carson.
Well, he talks a little bit about like how the railroads weren't really necessary until we made them necessary.
Yeah.
Kind of like, well, do we really need it anyways then? Because if we all just kind of live our own lives, we don't really need the railroad to go do this work.
Yeah. So he harps on this point a lot, right? This kind of idea that like, why do we need railroads? Well, because we have to get far and harvest all these things so that we can build more technology. And so now we have to build this railroad. But in building that railroad, he says it rides upon us. Like, what does that mean? It rides upon us instead of us riding upon it. Anyone have any ideas? Okay, it becomes a burden. Did you want to ask that?
That's what I was gonna say, I'm like, if the cost is too great.
Yeah, but they're like, well, we need this, but why do we need this? Well, because we need those other things to build these other things. So it's like, what if we just didn't need those other things? Then we wouldn't need the railroad. But in needing those other things, we create this railroad, which creates these other problems. And it's kind of like this cycle of like we have to have these things, and so we have to have these problems, so to try and fix those problems. But like, would we have those problems if we just didn't worry about needing those things in the first place, right? We all just did our thing and like really like dug into like living the essential life, right? And I think, you know, this is like all technology, right? And one of the questions on there asks you, what are examples of railroads in our own life? Does anyone have an idea for that? Railroads in our own society? Yeah.
I think it's built like social structure almost, like the rich get what they want and it becomes a burden on everybody below them.
Yeah, like who makes the rich rich? Well, it's the poor people. Who makes the Instagram, like whatever, what are they called, influencers famous? Well, all of us watching their crap, right? Like maybe if we just decided we don't need that, then they wouldn't have the ability to like lord over us, right, with their influentialness. Okay. Other thoughts about technology that we think we need, but then creates more problems. Yeah, Maddie.
Like cell phones, like for parents, you know, their parents never had one, so
Yes.
they were able to do it better.
I lived without a cell phone. I actually got one in 8th grade, which was like pretty early, but I only wanted like a snake game. It was like a Nokia brick phone, you know? Maybe you don't know, they're like ancient now. But like really, like we didn't have cell phones and we ran amok like all the time, and somehow it just like all worked out, right? But now we need the cell phone so we can get a hold of people. And if we can't get a hold of them, we're like, what's wrong with you? I know you have your phone on you all the time, but we're like, but I just need a break. Or we wouldn't need a break, we didn't have phones, and like, just all the things, right? Like phones create a lot of problems by needing them that like wouldn't be problems if we didn't have phones. Yes, love it. Okay, anything else you wanna say about railroads? Cool. The last few questions ask kind of about his greater purpose for the piece. Well, actually, sorry, there's the news step first. What does he say about news? He says that, like, to a philosopher, all news is gossip. What do you think about that claim? That's Joseph, we haven't heard from you.
So I think there's a difference between news and gossip, a very big one. One is like gossip's not very verified very well. It's also spread usually by word of mouth.
Okay.
But they do share some similarities, like about spreading information.
Okay. I like that. So you're doing kind of just like a baseline. So yeah, news does spread information the same way that gossip does, but they're kind of maybe different modes. Okay, other ideas about whether or not you agree with this? Lillian.
Gossip, I think, is considered more petty and like not really necessary. And to a philosopher whose focus is on like, meaning of life and deep questions, stuff like that could probably seem petty. Like news could seem petty and not that important.
Yeah. Okay, let's think about this like a little bit. So, big news story that I forgot about until like yesterday. Kobe died last year. Whoa, like with the whole pandemic, we thought that was going to be the defining moment of 2020. Boy, were we wrong. Okay. But he died. How did that affect your life?
Not really.
Did it affect how you see the world? No, maybe you would be less likely to get on a private helicopter. Maybe, but probably not, right? Just because we know that thing, it was reported to us right away, it had no impact, right, on your life. Murder hornets, another weird thing from last year, right? News, it was everywhere. Did it really affect your life? No, right? Really, I don't think it really affected anyone. Maybe, I don't know if anyone got like attacked by murder hornets. That would suck, right? But like, unless they're in your backyard, that doesn't really affect you, right? And he says in here, once you've read about like this catastrophe or like an earthquake here, you've kind of read them all, right? Like, okay, that sucks that there's an earthquake, but what does that do to your day-to-day life? Nothing. Just like gossip. Oh, okay, I know this about you, but how does that affect your life? Well, it really doesn't, right? And so he's thinking, like, back in the day, they had newspapers, they had like a morning edition and a nightly edition. Sometimes they'd have a special edition if something like crazy happened, right? And so they're constantly reading this news, but it's having no impact on like the kind of people they are or anything in the real world. So he's like, why are you obsessed with getting all this information that doesn't even push you to like what is important in life? And I think he would be appalled by our civilization now, where it's like a finger click away and it's always updating. Right? He's just like, why does any of that matter? Instagram, he probably would be like, it's crap. Instagram is crap. Facebook is crap. Right? You wouldn't see the purpose in it. Unless it pushes you to think more deeply about what life is. Right? Which is interesting, because like, even like in the adult circle, right? Like I didn't really care about the news. I was like, I'd rather read a book. But apparently it's like important to like conversations, to like know what's going on with like society and politics. So like I tried to a little bit, but then I'm like, maybe I had it right before and be like, I don't care. Right? What does that do for me knowing that like, oh, our government's screwed up. Great. Excellent. Moving on, right? So it just is interesting, like all this emphasis we put on being up to date and like, did you know, or did you hear, or I know this, but does it really matter? Okay, the last few questions ask about the shallowness of people's perception. And he says, our vision does not penetrate the surface of things versus reality, where only great and worthy things have any permanent or absolute existence. Think about how that compares to your own experience. Interpret what Thoreau says when he means men esteem truth remote in the outskirts of the system. In eternity there is indeed something true and sublime, but all these times and places and occasions are now and here. God himself culminates in the present moment. Let's talk about that one. What does that mean? What does that imply? Thoughts. It's kind of deep now, and this is kind of the whole purpose of why he's writing. The other things are just kind of metaphors for what he's talking about, and then this is kind of getting at just his overall thoughts. So he says in that first sentence, men esteem truth remote in the outskirts of the system. What does that mean? Sandy, what do you think that means? Where do we think truth is? Okay, anyone help her out? Samantha?
I think, so, we want truth and we want it now, but we're really good at looking for it in the wrong places.
Okay, I like
So
that.
we try and find truth like on our phone, we ask our friends, or however we decide to find it, but his point is like, no, you're looking in all the wrong places to find it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's part of it. Hannah?
How I kind of took it is like we focused on the past and the future, but not really on the present. That's where we need to be focusing. Like we dwell too much on like what happened and what's going to happen rather than what's happened.
Definitely, he wants us to focus in on like the moment. But he's saying like, we think of a truth as being like out there, like, oh, like you said, like a lot of religions look backwards to great figures in their religion, no matter what it is, right? And they're like, oh, that was truth there, and I have to look back to find. Or looking future, a lot of religions believe that there'll be some future event, right? That like where everything will come together, or where things will make sense, or like this world will like be uplifted, or whatever, right? But he's like, but that's not right, right? Where is truth? Well, it's here in the moment with us. And then he says, God himself culminates in the present moment, right? So culminates means like comes to completion, is at its very like highest peak, right? And he's like God is his most powerful, his most omniscient, his most omnipresent, right here in this moment. And so we don't need to look further. What in this moment is true, right? Truth isn't out there. You can find it now if you're willing to dig deep and find it. When we think about like, oh, we have to wait till this future time to like really find truth in the meaning of life, we really rob the present moment of the power that it has. And a lot of religions believe that God is never changing, so why are we going to wait till later if he's already perfect now and we can find that truth and that connection now? That's interesting, right? And then the last one asks, according to Thoreau, how do you push through the outer appearance to truth and reality? Any ideas on that? I think for him, and I think he says this at the beginning and at the end, that last paragraph, well, second to last paragraph, he says, let us spend one day as deliberately as nature, right? And then let us not be overwhelmed in that terrible rapid and whirlpool called dinner, situated in meridian shadows. If the bell rings, why should we run? Right, so let's go to nature, because like nature, was the original, right? And if getting back to the original is where we can find truth, and not all this other crap that we think is important to life, then that's how we can cut through kind of the outer appearance and get back to what is reality by looking to what is natural, and by saying I'm not gonna let the government, let society make me an ant, right? I'm gonna live deliberately. Any questions about this? Okay, if you did not read through and annotate, you still need to do that. And it is not pointless, even if you've answered the questions. Because, remember, on the argument prompt, you need lots of evidence just at your disposal, right? The more you have kind of in your evidence locker, right, the easier it's going to be for you to have points and defenses for your positions in these argument things. So, transcendentalists are very respected in society, and they are things that your readers, when they're reading through, like, okay, yeah, that's a solid source, right? So as you're reading these things, and as you go to take like the exam, it'd be a good idea to kind of, oh, okay, what was where I live and where I live, or what were his major points? Okay, that's something I could file away for some of the arguments that are being asked for me to make on these exams, right? And so everything that we're reading is helpful to you in that you can use it as evidence. And also, a lot of the texts that you're going to get on the multiple choice are going to be archaic and difficult language. And by forcing yourself to dig into these texts, you're practicing those skills so that when you get a passage on the AP exam, you're not like overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Like you've already practiced really trying to get through difficult language, okay? So all of this is helpful to you. Do not skip it, okay? If you're done with this, you can turn it in. If not, finish it before you turn it in, obviously. We're now going to do our second argument prompt. I'd like to project it, but I really don't think we'll have time until next time to do that. I'm going to hand you the hard copy because I think it's important that you write it, because that's what they've told us the exam will be. I'm not sure if they will, like last year, because we went all online, they changed that and did it typed. But if you handwrite it and then it gets changed to typing, that's only going to help you write, because it'll be faster, versus if you are like typing it and then you have to handwrite it and you're timing all off, right? So if you'll write your name on this, that way if you want to turn in a hard copy when we're done, you can, or you can just take a picture and upload it on Canvas if you'd rather do that. Oh, sorry, I think I'm short. All right. I will go over with you kind of like the steps we talked about last year. Right? Who remembers what we did? No one? And then you're doing that. And then I'm going to give you minutes. We're going to write an intro and body paragraph today. Only for this prompt. So make sure you have something to write with. If you don't, I might have like a. I think someone stole one of my pens last time, but I can get you something. And if you like line paper, over by the window, there's some line paper. Okay, so just a brief reminder of the steps. Like, you'll get through basically like 6 steps today, because like most of the steps come at the beginning, because you want to have a solid beginning so that the rest of your essay is on a good foundation. So you're going to analyze the prompt and identify the task. Okay, what is it asking you to do? You should like underline that. If you don't understand what the prompt is asking you to do, and then you don't do it, you're not going to get any points, right? Because you haven't done what they asked. So that's essential that you understand what is being asked of you. Then you're going to brainstorm potential evidence. Remember, evidence can come from a lot of different sources. It can be historical. It can be books you've read. It can be popular culture. It can be personal experience. I remember last time, you can take creative license with personal experience, right? They don't know your life, right? So you could be like, oh yeah, this thing happened. Maybe it didn't. But at that point, like, I mean, you're trying to show them that you have the skills to do that, right? However, do not make up something that a historical figure said. So you cannot be like, Nelson Mandela said Instagram is great. He did not say that, okay? And that is fact checkable, right? So you don't want to do that. But you can, you know, take creative license with your own life, right? So, and you weren't here to tell you that last time, but yes, that's what I figured out. So, lots of different sources for evidence. You can kind of make a little list. Then you want to make a plan. There should not be like a detailed outline. It's just like, okay, here's my thesis. Here's my like first paragraph. Maybe here's the evidence I'll use. Second paragraph point, the evidence I'm going to use, and that's like all you need, right? Just a quick jotting. You're not taking a million years to do that. Then you're going to start writing the intro. After you have your idea of where you're going, you'll introduce the issue and a strong thesis. So remember, there's a couple different ways that you can start your intro. You can be like, here's what some people think, here's what other people think, here's what I think, and kind of find your niche. Or you can be like, here's this experience that this person had or that I had, or some sort of example, and then your thesis underneath that connects to that, but you're like funneling, right, from some interesting thing to your thesis. And your thesis should be complex, right? You want to have a qualifier maybe, like, yes, I agree, except for this, right? And you can use first person in these argument prompts because some of the evidence is pulling from your own life, right? So that is okay. And then finally, you'll write the body paragraphs. If you're only doing 2 body paragraphs, it'll be about 12 minutes per body paragraph. I think sometimes that's the best way to go, unless the essay just really lends itself to 3 body paragraphs, and at that point you're just taking 8 minutes per. But the problem with that is sometimes to switch gears between ideas, that takes a few minutes, and so I just would like really ponder whether that's a good idea or whether developing really well 2 ideas to back your point would be better, okay? And then we're not gonna do this today, but you would write the conclusion. They can be really quick, like 2 sentences, 3 sentences, where you're restating your thesis and you're like, and this is how it applies to you, my reader, right? And then the timing overview. The brainstorming intro, so like steps 1 through 5, should take about 12 minutes, very quick. And then your body paragraph, each one should take about 12 minutes, leaving you 4 minutes for your conclusion. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so I'm going to read the prompt with you, and then I'm going to give you 24 minutes. That'll be for your intro, and then your body paragraph, and then we'll come back together. So, that's what did I just do? Right here. So, this says, in 1891, Irish author Oscar Wilde observed, disobedience in the eyes of anyone who has read history is man's original virtue. It is through this disobedience that progress has been made, through disobedience and through rebellion. Wilde claims that disobedience is a valuable human trait and that it promotes social progress. Write an essay that argues your position on the extent to which Wilde's claims are valid. Use appropriate examples from your reading, experience, or observations to support your argument. And remember that you should do the following. You're going to respond to the prompt, write it with a thesis that presents a defensible position. So it needs to be some sort of a stance, right? So you're saying, here's what I think about that claim. It should be arguable. You don't want to just say, like, here's his claim. Well, it's right there, right? So do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you agree sort of, but not in this case, right? So think about that. Provide evidence to support your line of reasoning. Remember, the line of reasoning is that kind of connecting flow through your whole essay, right? So it should feel cohesive. If you need to make one point for another point to make sense, you should do it in that order, right? So everything you're doing is connected to proving whatever your thesis is, right? Which is about that stance. And then finally, you need to make sure that you're explaining how the evidence supports your line of reasoning. So for your body paragraphs, it's helpful to think of that Peel method, right? Here's the point, here's my evidence, I'm explaining it, and I'm linking it back to my thesis, right? And you probably want at least 2 pieces of evidence per body paragraph, if not like more, right? But not so much that you can't do it in 12 minutes. So it's like a fine line, right? Questions? Does anyone need something to write with? We good? All right, then you have 24 minutes starting now.